Y'all, I am so excited. I'm like drinking the best cup of chai that I think has ever been made. But what I think is so exciting is that as we kind of dive into AAPI Month, that we as a staff kind of get to talk about our experiences. And what I love is we have so many different just experiences being represented at the table today. So I would just kind of love to know here, like, say your name for people in the group, but then also your kind of cultural background. And I'll also love to know what your church experience was like growing up.
So I'm Julie Jin. I am South Korean. And my experience growing up in the Asian American church was one where it was really a place for all our families who have immigrated to the United States who don't really have a lot of extended family in the States. It was really a place for us to all congregate together. So we lived at church all day Sunday because really it was like coming together as a family. And for me personally, it was a really fun place for me. I had a lot of friends. A lot of my core friends were from church, and it was a very encouraging place overall. But I do have to say that in terms of like thinking of church ministry, it wasn't necessarily a place that encouraged me as a female to really aspire to that, because those who were female and in church ministry was either the pastor's wife or kind of a senior pastor's assistant, kind of a pastor, you know? Nothing wrong with that, but it was just, that was really the only two models that we had.
I'm Chikan To, and my family's Chinese. We all were born in Vietnam, and now we live in America. Actually, my name is a pretty good example of my background because it's actually a Chinese name written in Vietnamese and then transliterated into English. Wow. So it's all those hoops together. And my church experience growing up, my parents were really involved in church. My dad was a pastor and like choir director and all those things. And I don't think I would say I had the greatest time growing up in Chinese church. It always felt like a place where there were a lot of shoulds and not necessarily a lot of like, what do I want or what do we prefer to do? So I think I enjoyed being there with my family. I think, Julie, similar to your experience, it was a place for immigrants that had come to the U.S. to band together and preserve their culture together, especially within a church context. But I think when I was in junior high, we went to a Baptist, like American church, because they had like a stronger, at least my parents thought it was like a stronger kids program.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
So my name is Betsy Sunny, and I kind of have a little bit of a unique experience. I grew up spending half of my time in Malayali church, so I'm Indian American. My family is from Kerala, so that is kind of the terminology that we go by. But I spent half the time with my grandmother in Malayali church, and then half the time in American church. It didn't favor both experiences, I felt like. There was always a language barrier. I didn't grow up learning Malayalam, which is the mother tongue, because my mom really so wanted me to learn English, and she wanted to make sure that I assimilated as well as possible. So I went to Malayali church. I couldn't understand anything, but it was really long. But I always loved seeing my grandmother. Like, that was her community. She came alive. That was her home, and that was her space. And then I went to English church with my mom every other week, and kind of in that classic, you have your 2 feet in 2 spaces, not really sure like where do you land ultimately, but have come to really kind of reconcile what that experience of worship looks like for me now as an adult, for sure.
My name is Johnathan Shimabuku. I am Japanese American. So my last name is Shimabuku. Like the actual full name in Japanese is Shimabukuro, which means Shima means island and Bukuro means bag. So my name means island bag. So that Shimabukuro, when my great grandfather immigrated from Japan, Okinawa, Japan to Hawaii, like they cut off the RO, so it's just Shimabuku. And in Hawaii, there's a lot of Shimabukus as well as Shimabukuro. So my dad grew up in Hawaii, and my mom is still a Japanese citizen. But I had a unique childhood because I grew up in like a lot of countries outside of the U.S. So like I lived in the States, but I also lived in Japan, Thailand, Malaysia, Egypt in high school before coming to the States for college. So like growing up in the church, it's like I haven't really like grew up in like that stereotypical Asian church or Japanese church. It's been like a lot of non-denominational English-speaking churches.
Yeah, so my name is Mary Thevatheril. I grew up pretty Indian in terms of my cultural background. My parents immigrated before I was born. I was the first generation born in America. I went to Malayali church my whole life. I actually am still really connected to the Malayali community in the Malayali church. Until I moved to Willow, I still went to Malayali church. And when I go back home, I still go to Indian church. My dad pastors an Indian church in Atlanta with like many different kinds of Indians. But I attribute every part of who I am to growing up in the Indian community and growing up as an Indian American. I became like a desire to go into ministry because I grew up Indian American, and it was just always impressed upon us to be involved in the church, be involved in ministry. And when your parents are involved in ministry, it is an obvious next step for you to be involved in ministry. As it related to me as a woman, different story. Yeah. But my parents actually always desired for all three of us, I have two sisters, to go into ministry, and all three of us have the desire to. So growing up in the church actually was the best part of my life. I always said I feel more comfortable and more safe sitting in a dark church than I would in my room. I always felt safe in a church. It was never scary to me. It was never a scary place, no matter all the politics or drama or legalism, anything that happened, church was a safe place. Yeah. So,
so interesting. I feel like all of us kind of display like the gamut of experiences. So do y'all ever feel like you have to kind of compare your experience growing up as a kid or even to your experience as an adult? Are there things that you're learning, unlearning, or even unpacking even now?
Oh, definitely. I think one big thing that I've been unpacking about my understanding of church and how my cultural background has, been a lens that I've seen church in has been who I perceive Jesus to be and who I perceive God to be has very much been, I was raised to think of God and Jesus as someone that provides whatever I need, but definitely not whatever I want. It's only like God will give me what I need, but not necessarily what I want, because I think that lens for an immigrant experience is through survival. So they're trying to survive, and so they see God as the provider for survival, and they're not even thinking about their own wants that are outside of that. And that's something I've been unpacking and trying to grow in understanding more about what actually makes me happy, rather than what do I just need to survive.
Yeah, that's so good. I can totally resonate with that, especially in terms of approaching God with a scarcity mentality versus an abundance mentality, that God is actually someone who wants to abundantly bless you. And I think that's something that I have learned as an adult, actually being in a non-Korean American church. Not that, that's Korean American churches like try to have that type of ministry on purpose, but I think because of the immigrant experience and even with when I think about my parents, how they grew up in Korea and just the war-torn country that it was at one point, just that scarcity mentality. But also it's because of that is, when I think about my parents' generation, especially of believers, they are just the most amazing prayer warriors because they know how to cleave to God in prayer. Like they have nothing else to rest on. And so that scarcity mentality birthed a prayer, like generation of prayer warriors. And at the same time, kind of then you don't get to see the fullness of who God is.
I think there's like something about but what both of you have said, you have to hold with so much nuance and so much complexity, not to like shame what was and then glorify what is. But also kind of see, okay, this is like what served me well, this is what didn't. Because I think about your sense of agency, right? And I struggled with the same thing. I feel like I grew up and it was like, God spared you, and had so much mercy for you. So want nothing else. Isn't that enough? And then I think especially when you add the other layer of I'm also a first generation American, but thinking about your immigrant identity on top of that being like, you came to America, like, what else more do you want? And there actually reminds me of a comedy special called Homecoming King. And it reminds me, like, no, like, I should get to want more, and not in like an entitled way, but to dream, and open up, and even like being able to dream with God. I'm kind of with you. I feel like I'm starting to unpack, like, going to the throne and really kind of putting my life before and being like, okay, not just what you have for me, but like, what do you want? What will cause delight? Like, how can I celebrate and kind of like just kind of expand the gamut of emotions that I can kind of come to God with.
It's like we climb this mountain of shoulds in our whole life that hopefully at like the summit you can peek into like want, but we're not even sure, like, should there be actually, this burden of having to get to the peak, or is that something that's actually like a God-given thing, is the ability to see what makes you happy?
And I can't imagine that people who see us like know that that's like levels of which we're processing on like a daily basis, for sure. I think the older I get, I have a lot more empathy for my parents, and they are parents, and your kind of scope gets widened so much. But you wonder, like, how much of this was their way of making sense of the world that they were living in? Yeah, for sure.
In my life, like, I don't know if it has to do with Asian culture, but like, I'm trying to present myself as like, oh, I'm happy, nothing's wrong with me, everything's perfect, everything's okay, everything's perfect. And so like, we don't really get to like talk about the real stuff. And so I don't know, as an adult, and I'm unpacking, and even being in this church, like, like, it's okay to be happy and think positive and be positive, but like, it's really important to just like be able to be honest and be real. I feel like when I think about my culture and like even my parents, like, I ask my mom, like, how are you? And like, she'll say, good. But in reality, like, maybe she's not good, but like, she's saying that because it's just, I don't know how the culture is, I guess. So, being in American culture, I'm trying to like be honest and be like, trying to really think about my feelings and be like, I feel this, and like, I want this for sure. And like, what are my wants? What are my needs? And communicating in that way as well.
I feel like a trajectory for us, like in spiritual formation, is like the sense of veracity. Like kind of what you're saying, Johnathan, I love. It's like actually being able to be honest with our expression with God, and to not, whether it's like our needs and our wants, or, suffering versus joy, or just being able to own our awareness. I think that's huge.